Hi everyone, this is William with the 1921 Diary Series. It's 4:40 p.m. here, or 1640, but the sun is already low on the horizon, so I hope that's not distracting behind me. So we are still into, this is part 9, I believe, of this very long diary entry of the 31st of January 1921, and it's been really full of information, and I feel like we've learned a lot about Dmitri and also about the state of the Russian immigration in France and specifically in Paris. So we are definitely drawing to a close with this diary entry. Today we're going to do pages 65 and 66. And the last page of this diary entry, I believe, is 72. And then we'll go on to the entries about his daily life. So the last several portions of this diary entry have talked about his involvement with the Trepov group, which was now calling itself the Russian Assembly. So a group of non-military, for the most part, Russian monarchists who had occupied important places in the government and at court. And we've talked about Dmitri's own little subgroup, which he called the Information Bureau, that was all military men with a military background, obviously not still serving in the military since the Civil War was over. And so yesterday in particular, we talked about espionage and my growing sense that Dmitri had contact and was almost certainly an asset and perhaps at some point even an agent, as distinguished from an officer, from a person who is actually employed by, say, MI6 or the CIA. Well, not the CIA yet at that point, but an intelligence agency. But rather a foreign national providing some information, perhaps for money, perhaps not, more or less wittingly. An asset would not necessarily know that they're being milked for information. An agent definitely would be doing that consciously. And that makes me think of some of the some of the works that came out of historical revision on Rasputin. Quite a few years ago, I think there were 2 of them that made a stir, where the claim was that Rasputin was actually killed by British intelligence, and that it was British intelligence and not Dmitri and Felix and their co-conspirators who were responsible for arranging the assassination, if not for doing the killing of the man directly. And I really don't buy into those. I really do not. Revisionist history is almost always cherry-picking things and, discounting or distrusting any account, any previously existing account, and it just didn't seem to me to have the ring of truth. So that's how I feel about that, and so I want to prevent myself, really, of course, from getting too excited about the hints in this text that, that maybe Dmitri did have some kind of intelligence role. But, it's something I'd like to pursue. So, we have the police dossier on him and what he was doing in Paris, and coming to the conclusion that he was harmless. But, maybe there's a separate intelligence dossier. I don't know. And I don't know if there's one on him in Britain. I think Ed has looked into that and drawn a blank. And I really want to look into that for Switzerland. I don't think that Dmitri had any political role when he arrived in Switzerland in 1939. He had stepped away and put some distance between himself and Alexander Kazembek and the Young Russia Party. Alexander Kazembek, his whole career as an emigre political leader in France, had been he'd been dogged by the rumor that he was a Soviet agent. And he wasn't, but he was definitely a fellow traveler, and he ended up returning to Russia, to Soviet Russia, after the Second World War and spending the rest of his life there. But anyway, by the time he was in Switzerland, I'm pretty certain that Dmitri wasn't, if he'd ever had any role as either an asset or an agent for the British, he didn't have such a role any longer. But having said that, there were rumors after his death that he had been murdered. He died in March 1942, and then there were these rumors that he'd been murdered, nobody specifying who it would have been. Some people saying, well, it must have been the Soviets, and other people saying, well, it must have been the Nazis. But he just wasn't important enough to either of them. He'd been outspokenly an anti-Nazi, and even though earlier on in the 30s he'd been, like Kazembek, dogged by rumors that he was some kind of crypto-Bolshevik, I don't know. There was just no reason for anybody to have murdered him, and the more updated information is convincing enough to me that I would say, yes, he died of kidney failure. I don't know whether it was tuberculous kidney failure or not, but forget about the whole murder thing. That was never based in any fact. But that notwithstanding, I do want to see if there was any distrust of him on the part of the Swiss authorities, or if there was any, sort of any assessment when he first came into the country that might still be in an archive somewhere and accessible. So I really need to look into that. All right, so I've been a little long-winded. Sorry about that. We only have one illegible word today. He starts out talking about his information bureau, and then he goes into a completely different, well, sort of related, but different theme. Okay. Yes, a great deal of information is coming in. I myself have had the opportunity to speak to many people personally, thanks to Gulevich, who's bringing a lot of people to me. My personal situation is, of course, extremely difficult. I see with perfect clarity that all these people come to me exclusively because they see me as the future ruler. To refuse that and not see anyone would perhaps be the right and safe thing to do, but on the other hand, my inner voice says that I should be meeting with Russians, that is correct, and that blank. After all, the fundamental question is still unresolved. After all, Kirill has not yet renounced the throne, and after him come his two brothers, so overall my life is stupid and abnormal, and where it will all end, God alone knows. I myself know only one thing, and that is that I can't live this way any longer. As I said before, that is, in previous diary entries, I've become frightfully drawn to family life. I'm tired to death to knock about as I do it now. I want even just a tiny illusion of a home life. I would get married tomorrow. So here I am again, facing the same questions. All right, and so here we are again, alongside him, invisibly watching while he struggles with this clearly very heartfelt and sincere issue. Okay, so we've seen, he's been depressed overall. This whole period, he's been depressed. But there was a bit of a ray of sunshine with the Information Bureau where he really felt like something was beginning to happen, and he was a part of it, an active part of it. But now, as he continues to write this long diary entry, I don't know if he wrote it all at one sitting or if he, did it several mornings in a row or what the thing was. But yeah, he's back to this idea of how stupid and pointless it is and how he is in danger of devolving into a superfluous man, a lishny человек. And there's a slightly different. So Gulevich was this Russian general who'd been in Finland during the Civil War and had been involved with the Red Cross, and later would be kind of going back and forth and kind of flirting with the Nazis because he was so anti-Soviet, but also falling afoul of them and ending up being imprisoned by them and then released and blah, 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 so on and so forth. Anyway, he had connections. He'd been on site during the Civil War, and he was bringing some of these people to Dmitry to talk to him as the head of this Information Bureau. And hopefully Dmitry, in his diary entries describing his day-to-day life, will give us some names of who was coming and going from his flat at 76 Rue Miromesnil. Okay, and then he talks about my personal situation, which he underlines. And it's extremely difficult because these people are seeing him as the future ruler. Well, this is an interesting change. He's not using the word Tsar or Gasudar or monarch. Now he's using the word Pravitel, which is obviously closely related to the word pravitelstvo, for government, the word that means government in Russia in a neutral sense, not describing in any way what form of government. So he's going to be, pravitel then would be, basically the head of the government, so a ruler. And these people whom Gulevich are bringing to him are seeing him in that role. And he kind of realizes that it's not necessarily either right or safe for him to be allowing them to see him in that role and not saying, well, I can't be a part of this yet, because the whole situation, as he puts it, the fundamental question is still unresolved, so I need to wait. So there's a part of him that thinks, I'm not really doing the right thing here, and it may also not be safe. It may be that there were some politically active and well-known Russian emigres, at least one very famous case where a man was abducted in broad daylight. A black car pulled up beside him and people jumped out and threw him into the car, and the next anybody saw of him, he was on trial in the Soviet Union. So there was some danger involved. But anyway, contrary to that, he also has this inner voice. So that's an interesting distinction, because he's talking about himself consciously thinking that this is maybe not right and maybe not safe, but he also has this, you would have to say, other inner voice that's saying that maybe not that it's right for him to allow people to see him as the future ruler, but that he should be meeting with Russians, and that is the correct thing to do. And yes, for God's sake, meet with Russians. but not just with the type of Russians that you're meeting with. Meet with Russian refugees and, meet with Russians from all walks of life. But anyway, then, so, he's talking basically about the issue of legitimacy, and it's an issue. There's no throne in Russia. There's not going to be any throne in Russia. So as far as I'm concerned, it's absurd that anybody is still even arguing about this. But Kirill, whom at this stage Dmitry very much wants to see renounce the throne, has not done so. And so from the point of view of who's next in the line of succession, after Alexei, the Tsar's son, and Mikhail, the Tsar's younger brother, are out of the picture, who now is the legitimate heir to the throne. And that claim is made by Kirill because after Nicholas II, after his line died out, thanks to the Bolsheviks, the senior branch of the family was the Vladimirovichy, and the eldest of the three Vladimirovich sons was Kirill. Okay, that's fine so far as it goes, but it's not as straightforward as that. It wasn't even as straightforward as that with Alexei and Michael. Alexei had a terminal illness. He would have been very, very, very lucky if he'd made it to 20 or 21 and been able to father a child. Michael was married to a divorced commoner, which disqualified him, whether Nicholas liked it or not, with respect to the fundamental laws of the empire. Kirill and his brothers were born to a non-Orthodox mother. A technicality, but nonetheless that disqualified them. And Kirill was also married to his first cousin, which is not allowed by the Orthodox Church. And of the younger brothers, one was already married to his mistress, and the middle brother, Andrei, would soon marry his. In fact, by January 31st, I think he already had. So there's not a single person who can really say, I am the legitimate claimant to the throne on the basis of the 1797 fundamental laws of the imperial family. So Dmitry is as good as anyone in that respect. He's popular, unlike Kirill, and he's young, and he's intelligent, and he would make an excellent constitutional monarchy, except for one thing, and this is all hypothetical, but to my mind, there was one thing that absolutely disqualified him, even more than Kirill's famous march to the Duma after the revolution, wearing a red ribbon on his clothes and marching in support of the provisional government. That's fine. Dmitry supported the provisional government too at that time. But the one thing that completely disqualified Dmitry was the fact that he had been involved in the murder of a Russian peasant. And that's just insurmountable, even if it was done as a heroic act and a sacrificial act on his part, knowing that it would always make him, to some extent, a pariah. Doesn't matter. That's just the fact. He had been involved in the murder of a Russian peasant, and that was not, that was not going to fly. In my book, yeah, at that point, lots of people had blood on their hands because of the Civil War and Russian fighting against Russian. So maybe, but I don't know. He never once brings that up. So apparently neither he nor the people surrounding him considered that a factor. Which is not to say that he wasn't remorseful about that. He absolutely was. It really haunted him, but he didn't see any political downside to it, apparently. So then we go into this next theme, the theme of how desperately he wants to have a family life, and he has not had a family life. The closest he ever came, really, was when he and Maria were living as a kind of little family group with their Aunt Ella and the Lamings. So their father had been a very hands-off kind of presence, even while he still had custody of them until 1902. And so Sergei had been an unpleasant presence in their life overall, and their aunt had held him at a distance until Sergei died. And then there really was something like this cozy little home life with the Lamings, and Nicholas and Alexandra were part of that, but kind of off to one side. So this is what he wants, what he really wants. In the past, all of the women he's been involved with have been demi-monde. They've been actresses and ballet dancers and that sort of thing. And if you believe that he actually was head over heels in love with his cousin Irina, as Felix Yusupov, who ended up marrying Irina, claimed, then, there's a bridge in Brooklyn I'd be happy to sell you. That was just something Felix Yusupov made up. So anyway, yeah, he wanted a family life, and for some reason he writes a few lines in English. He sometimes has this disconcerting way of even mid-sentence switching to English. It's funny because he's in France, but when he reverts to or I shouldn't say reverts because Russian is his native language, but when for whatever reason he switches language, it's almost always to English. So this is why the English sometimes sounds a little funny, or the sentence doesn't seem quite to mesh, because he'll switch languages mid-sentence, and because even though he grew up speaking English, his English was still a little idiosyncratic. So we have this sentence where he starts in English, "I'm tired to death," sort of shades of what Christ said in the Garden of Gethsemane, that he was sick unto death. So that's basically what Dimitri's saying, although I don't know if he had the actual biblical reference in mind. And then he uses an infinitive verb that you need to use the word, in English you need to use the word to. I'm tired to death to knock about as I do it now. So to knock about as I do it now is in English. Interesting, knock about. That's a slang term. Would that have been British slang? I think usually I would say knock around. I'm just knocking around, not knocking about, but maybe it's British slang. Okay, and then I want even just a tiny illusion of a home life. So a home life is in English, and well, he has a tiny illusion of a home life insofar as he's able to spend a lot of time with his sister, and has been spending a lot of time with his sister, and also with his stepmother and his two little half-sisters. But yeah, that's not what he wants. He's almost 30. He wants a wife. He wants his own children. He would get married tomorrow if he could. But here I am again facing the same question. So what are those questions? The questions are, is it my fate to be the ruler or the head of state in Russia? And if so, can I marry whoever I want? Or do I need to marry a certain kind of person? And yeah, how long can I bear it being in this state of limbo? Because it could be years, he's not thinking it's going to be next week. So those are the questions in tomorrow's portion of this diary entry that he will be talking about. He talked about them earlier in this same diary entry, but as he's been writing, probably day after day, he is returning to that, because that that idea has such a grip on him and is so much at the center of his depression. So, good. I will see you next time.